In part one of Encounter at the Caves, we traveled with local psychologist Matthew Johnson to the Oregon Caves in southwest Oregon, where Johnson described his Bigfoot sighting, where he says it happened.
This is the tree, right here.
As we'll see later, the harrowing experience spurred Johnson to do his own research through expeditions into the wilderness to track the animal that he and others believe descended from Gigantopithecus, a 10-foot, 1,000-pound ape that lived side by side with humans more than 100,000 years ago. After his frightening encounter with the creature on a remote trail above the caves, Johnson and his family made their way back to the caves area, which includes a gift shop and chateau. He recounted his experience for a female ranger who told others, including fellow ranger John Roth, that she believed the shaken psychologist.
Yes, and she felt the same way that I did, that this person was not making this up.
Roth, who was not at the caves the day of Johnson's encounter, went up to the spot where the sighting happened with Johnson the next day to look for evidence of the large animal.
I did find what appeared to be at least one track. It was interesting in that it had a very large print, as you'd expect from his description of the classic 8-foot-tall, flat-faced, humanoid, hairy being. It was longer and wider than a human boot would be, even my boot, which is pretty big.
His findings, and Johnson's manner and detail in retelling the story, led Roth to one conclusion.
Well, based on the events that occurred right after the encounter, I have no question at all that he did not make this up.
The night of the encounter, Johnson decided to report his sighting on the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization website. That set off a media storm that landed him on more than a dozen national television shows and countless radio shows, not to mention the dozens of newspaper stories that retold his experience. The fact that it happened at a national monument visited by tens of thousands of people a year, combined with the fact that he's a psychologist, seemed to fuel the story for years after the sighting. But it also brought some unwelcome attention and accusations of ulterior motives.
I was accused of, he's just trying to drum up business this way. Like, hello, that's a good marketing strategy to bring in clientele as a psychologist. Hi, I just saw Bigfoot, so come see me. I mean, give me a break.
Representatives from the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization, or BFRO, contacted Johnson soon after his sighting. The BFRO is considered by many to be the most reputable of groups gathering information about Bigfoot, trying to use scientific methods in conducting their research. The BFRO sent veteran investigator Derek Randalls to check out Johnson's story.
He's not your typical, he's not your typical person that sees Sasquatch. You gotta, when you're interviewing somebody, you gotta take a lot of things into consideration, what their occupation is, if they have anything to gain or to lose by their sighting. And in his case, I thought that it was kind of a step out, because credibility is kind of a big thing, I would imagine, in his field, and for him to come out and talk about it, I was fairly impressed.
In his more than 100 investigations from 1990 to 2002, Randall said Johnson's sighting may have been the most credible. Randalls concluded half the cases he investigated were hoaxes, but he put the caves encounter in another category.
Scale of 1 to 10, I'd give him a 10, as a matter of fact. He seemed very credible.
After the dust settled, Johnson decided to get a group of friends together and go on expeditions into the wilderness near the Oregon Caves to try and get another glimpse of Bigfoot and to gather evidence on the animal's existence. Soon after his encounter, he was contacted by Bill York, a local wildlife biologist originally from England. As a young man, York moved to Africa and spent more than 3 decades on that continent hunting and tracking animals, many times rare ones, before moving to the United States. York told Johnson he'd like to be a part of these expeditions. Together, the duo would find many pieces of evidence that York said made him, a former skeptic, into a believer. The following footage comes from 2 such expeditions. In this first scene, York comes across a fresh footprint he says has ridges that look similar to the fingerprint-like designs on the bottom of primates' feet.
And you can see, if you look at it, you can see some little ridges and so on, which you would expect
like right there,
in the sole of a foot. Yeah.
Later on in the expedition, York found what he described as 3 possible Bigfoot sitting areas.
And it looks to me more as if they came and didn't actually sleep or anything here. They just stopped.
Little rest stop.
Crouched down and probably got a bit of sun or something. You can even see one or two places where it looks as if a big fat butt sat down in it.
York also discovered another interesting footprint on the side of a bank in steep terrain.
You'd now expect to find something like that there.
He helped explain the outline of the track and evidence of how big the foot was that made it, using his vast tracking experience.
Looks as if a heel pressed there because that twig is broken there. You see, so it looks as if the heel went around like that. This is the outer side of the foot. Little toe around about here. Big toe about here. Now my hand span like that is 10.5 inches. So that's probably a 14-inch span.
During their expeditions, Johnson said York and their friends heard blood-curdling screams near camp late at night that they couldn't attribute to any known animal.
There's nothing more thrilling than hearing it scream at you in the middle of the night in the pitch black forest, miles and miles away from any kind of help. It's a rush.
The things York saw convinced him that Bigfoot is out there.
I came up here basically as a skeptic. I don't mind telling you now, Matt. Is that okay? Yeah. I came along here basically as a skeptic with some knowledge of large primates. So I'm basically looking for evidence of large primates being in the area or having been in the area. Much to my surprise, I found masses of evidence that is so equivocal, but is so typical of what you would expect of large primates in this area. Tracks, bedding areas, 1 or 2 little feeding areas, the 3 squatting areas that you mentioned earlier, Bill. So to me, it's been a terrific experience. It's removed my skepticism. I never got a chance to actually see a creature, but then I didn't expect to. I didn't come here looking for Bigfoot. I personally only came here looking for evidence that would suggest that Bigfoot indeed exists and indeed exists in this area. Matt saw one, so I don't doubt their existence. But this morning, Matt and I saw some evidence which suggests that they could have even been here last night. Some of that evidence was of last night.
Sadly, in 2002, York died at the age of 69 without seeing the animal he was after. Still, Johnson was able to gather some hard evidence over the years.
This is a foot cast that we took up in the mountains within a 10-mile radius of the Oregon caves. We followed this set of tracks for a good mile. The track is about 20 inches long, which dwarfs my size 16 shoes.
Johnson also made a hand cast of an animal that apparently put a closed fist in the mud near a bait pile his research team had set up.
It is size proportionate with the kind of tracks, foot tracks we're finding out there in the mountains. My pride and joy is a juvenile track that we got up in the mountains in 2002. When you look closely at this cast, you can see the 5 toes, the padding on the toes. You can see dermal ridges. And this was in the area where we had a family group with a adult male, adult female, and a young one.
Johnson said York believed the evidence they gathered pointed to at least 2 family groups living in the area. The animals they tracked also covered remarkable distances over rough terrain.
We've hiked up mountainsides following tracks, no trails to walk on. We climb on our hands and knees up mountainsides following tracks that go in 3-4 foot strides like it's nothing to this animal to just walk right up the mountainside. And our longest set of tracks we followed was 2 miles. These animals are wonderful and big and strong, and we're in their home. And they've got a beautiful home.
The eerie screams in the night near camp were even recounted in a USA Today article after a reporter traveling with Johnson heard a frightening early morning scream. Johnson, who hasn't seen a Bigfoot in the 8 years since his encounter, said when the animals come near camp, they bring their familiar foul smell.
When they've come close enough to our camps at night and I got the whiff, and it was affirmed by their growls and their screams associated with the smell. This smell is unlike any other animal out here in the forest. And once you get a whiff of it, you'll never forget it.
For his part, York told his fellow researchers that he had confidence they'd see Bigfoot someday because of the unconscious data bank that builds up in a tracker's mind over time. He said he had hunted many rare animals without seeing them for years and eventually had a breakthrough.
I could probably hunt Bigfoot 20 times in this area, consciously looking for him and not see him. It would not shake my confidence in his existence, because I know I'd be finding evidence, like we have found evidence on this trip. So just because one doesn't actually see a Bigfoot, one is not as fortunate as Matt. One shouldn't be discouraged. You're going to make a breakthrough. You're going to see Bigfoot. And once you've seen him and you've learned enough about him, you're probably going to see him more often. You're probably going to know more about them. You're going to know their seasonal movements. You're going to know what kind of paths they walk along, what sort of places they avoid. And this accumulation of knowledge, one day you're going to say to yourself, my gosh, why did it take me so long to start seeing my first 1 or 2 Bigfoot? Unless you have an extraordinary bit of luck, like Matt did. One day, if you're persistent enough, seeing Bigfoot will become a reasonably predictable thing. That's my personal view. And I base it only on my past experience with other rare creatures.
But many skeptics over the years have said that Bigfoot sightings, including the Patterson film, are hoaxes, or people seeing one animal and mistaking it for another. Many scientists, including Roth, who is a biologist, say there are several scientific reasons that make it unlikely that there is such an animal.
The biology doesn't add up in terms of these beings be actually flesh and blood mammals. For a number of reasons. One is their wide geographic spread, and yet the infrequency of reports suggests that simply if they actually exist as a flesh and blood being, they're simply too widely scattered, frankly, to reproduce.
Roth said the region's climate would also make it difficult for primates to live in the wild. He said one explanation for Johnson's sighting could be that he saw another animal, like a black bear. But he does believe Johnson saw something.
What he described was what he thought he actually saw.
On the other hand, Roth said the mass of evidence collected over the last century, including sightings near the caves in the 1930s, can't be ignored. He said he couldn't rule out the idea that Sasquatch may call the area near the caves home.
We have some incredible tracks over the last 50 years or so. And to believe that all these tracks with dermal ridges, with rehealed injuries, etc., is all the work of oaks, is almost to me as unbelievable as flesh and blood beings.
Johnson has faced many tough questions over the years, including ones asked during the filming of this program, but he has a simple message for the skeptics.
I'm often asked by people who are skeptical, and understandably so, because I was one of them before my encounter, if this animal existed, where could it hide? How can it stay hidden from man? Those people, those skeptics, although it's understandable that they're that way, have never been on a mountaintop and looked at the vast wilderness. And this is only the tip of the iceberg in the state of Oregon, let alone the Pacific Northwest, British Columbia, Northern California. I guarantee you there's plenty of room for it to exist and stay hidden from man.
Some scientists, including Dr. Jeff Meldrum from Idaho State University, agree with Johnson that Bigfoot does in fact exist in these forests. For Johnson's part, he says he'll keep searching for the elusive animal and conclusive proof of the centuries-old Northwest legend. He vows he'll keep heading into the wilderness with dreams of the day he'll be lucky enough to get a second glimpse of Sasquatch.